December, and that means it's time for Call Clegg with me, Nick Clegg, notwithstanding my somewhat hoarse throat today, on LBC 97.3, and I'm taking your questions for the next half an hour, so do call on 0845 6060 973 or email at nickclegg@lbc.co.uk, or of course you can watch on lbc.co.uk. Let's go to the first caller, Phil in Gatwick. Hello, Phil.
Oh, good morning, Nick.
Hello.
We were having a conversation this week. We were talking about
Is this at your
the
workplace,
BBC's.
or?
Beg your pardon?
Sorry, when you're saying we, was this at work or?
Well, no, it was actually a conversation on LBC, but one or two other people have spoken about it. Basically, the huge news story, obviously covering regarding the death of Nelson Mandela coming out of South Africa on Thursday evening, was an enormous global news story. Yeah. But the BBC's reaction to this was absolutely overpowering, and there was nothing else in that evening on their news stories. They completely cleared the deck. Now, not wishing to detract at all from the importance of the news story and the very sad death of Mr. Mandela, this country was in the grip of an horrendous gale. We were being battered by 110-mile-an-hour winds. The railways had come to a halt. There was 2 people dead, and the biggest storm surge for 60 years was coming down the East Coast as the evening went by. Surely the BBC could have had some local news tucked on the end of their main evening news bulletins to inform the country of what was going on. Nobody really knew how that storm surge was going to affect the East Coast. It could have been absolutely disastrous.
And it's worth pointing out, Phil, stay on the line, there have been more than, I think it's 1,500 complaints to the BBC that the 10 o'clock news on BBC, which is meant to be the bulletin of record, you did have 2 Britons dead, you had worst storms in the east of England for 25 years, you also had the aftermath of the Chancellor's autumn statement, and literally not a word on anything other than the sad death of Nelson Mandela. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, look, I've always been very reluctant for politicians like me to start, suggesting or telling the BBC and other broadcast outlets how they should run their news, because it'll never end if politicians start trying to tell news outlets what they should do. And look, first, I think it's very good that people are responding. If they feel really strongly they weren't getting the news, they weren't getting other bits of news which, Phil, as you say, were certainly very important to those affected. Certainly those affected in the East Coast, and where these huge. I'm actually out in Norfolk later today, and it's affected parts of that county, for instance, very seriously indeed. So I can understand all of that, but as we all know, Mandela was just this extraordinarily unique figure, and so I don't find it surprising that the editors of these news programmes felt that they should dedicate a lot of time to the passing of this extraordinary man.
I think there's so many news programmes going on at the moment. Don't you think that they're competing just a little bit too much to the detriment of what's going on? Once upon a time, the BBC News, you used to get everything you needed off hourly radio bulletins, plus 12 noon, 6 p.m, 9 o'clock news, and then this 24-hour rolling news, breaking news. Once upon a time, a news flash was much more compelling than the rolling breaking news world that we live in.
It's interesting your reaction, Phil. Can I just? I'm interested. How do you get your news? How do you tend to?
Radio. I'm a long distance lorry driver, so I live away all week. So I get my. But
did you feel you were getting more of a rounded picture in the terms that you described on what you were listening to on radio? Or?
I got around. I gave up. I put the television on that night because I was concerned. My home village is 6 feet below high tide level in North Lincolnshire, and I was concerned. So I put the television news on in a hope to get any of that, and in the end I gave up on it. And in actual fact, LBC was managing to convey the Mandela story, the storm news, and even a travel bulletin on the end of a 3-minute slot. Yeah. And that 3-minute slot. Look,
I'm not a newsman, and I refer to Nick Ferrari and other, but it is a difficult balance to strike, isn't it? To do justice to what are sometimes exceptional stories that are of sort of global significance, and clearly the passing away of Nelson Mandela is one of those, whilst also making sure that people have access to information, news, on things that are going on going on closer to home.
Yes, it is very difficult to edit programmes or newspapers. Phil, thank you. I would say this, though, as a result of this, Mr. Clegg, it's a great shame because many of the nation missed me clashing with your parliamentary colleague Danny Alexander on Question Time, which had to get moved back to about 10 to midnight, and we had a nice healthy row, and not as many people saw it as should have done. But there it was over funding.
You'll have to be invited back on.
Yes, funding of free school meals for primary school. I think he was a bit surprised when I suddenly went for it, but it woke him up a little. Let's move on. Wasn't in the spirit of brotherly
I think a little less of you now.
Let's move on.
To move on to Tox in Lewisham. Hello, Tox.
Hi there. Good morning, Mr. Clegg.
Morning.
Hi, Nick.
Hello,
all right?
Tox. Yep.
Yeah, good. It was just a question that I had answered to yesterday, and it was also a conversation between friends. We also had this conversation on LBC as well.
Yeah.
It's regarding the selfie, the famous selfie that was taken this week at the memorial service for Mr. Mandela. What do you think about this? Deputy Prime Minister, what do you exactly think about this? I mean, I've got my opinions on this, and I just wanted to find out what you thought.
Well, first, can I point out they're not calling it a jointy? I want to point this out to Nick Ferrari, because Nick Ferrari and I did a joint. I told you, Nick, that there was a slightly dodgy way of calling it.
I know. We started something here,
So for all I know, the Prime Minister of Denmark, the United Kingdom, and the President of the United States were following the Ferrari-Clegg precedent on. I doubt it, by the way.
See whose name came first in that axis.
Look, more seriously, I know some people, are unhappy about it. I have to say, I think it was, a bit of friendly, light-hearted kind of joking around by the three of them. And I personally don't feel that people should be too censorious about it at all. It was, by the way, and this is the bit, just simply because I was there, which is worth emphasising. It was a very celebratory atmosphere. This was a real celebration of the man's life. There was dancing, there was singing. The crowd was in a very kind of jubilant mood. So it wasn't as out of keeping with the the setting as I think some people have suggested.
Yeah.
What do you think, Tox?
I mean, I thought I didn't see anything wrong with it, to be honest. The fact that, like I said to Nick, I found it funny that Mrs. Obama had quite a mood on her face. I think he was just quite jealous that she got left out. Are you jealous yourself that you got left out of the photo as well? Or did you
Tox, I don't worry. I've long given up worrying about whether I'm left out of these photos. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Were you sitting close enough that you could have been in that?
No. I was in the next section, I think. I wasn't even aware this was going on.
I mean, one columnist today says it's the photo that makes me tremble a little for the future of the free world.
I think, how can I put this very politely? That's slightly over-egging it. It's just a jointy.
It's a jointy.
But I do insist we call it you should insist we call it that it's a jointy.
It's a joint. Now, what was it? Just staying with the Mandela Memorial Service that you attended, Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Ed Miliband is looking daggers at you because you're in conversation with Bill Clinton. I don't know if you've seen this picture. He is furious. May I hand him?
Yes.
Why is he so angry? What are you talking about?
I think it's a bit unfair on Ed Miliband. I don't think
he's furious.
No, he's not. He's just looking to the side.
That look is bitter and fury mixed together. No, he wants to be involved.
I think it's calm and distinct.
Well, he's a very warm. What are you warmly chatting to?
I know Bill Clinton a bit because I met him a number of times. And funny enough, what I was talking to him about was the last time I saw him, which was a few weeks ago in London. He recommended to Miriam and I were both talking to him. He recommended a book that we should both read. It was called The End of Power.
Right.
And I'd forgotten the author. And Miriam dutifully went away and got the book and is reading it and was saying what an incredibly interesting. It's all about how power these days is now all very fluid and changes all the time, and you can't pull the sort of levers that you once could in business or politics. And so I was just saying to him, Miriam's read your book, and he was very. He's obviously he's a very thoughtful guy. And
yes, no, I've had the pleasure of meeting him on one occasion. You weren't in any way nervous when he suggested you should read a book called The End of Power, Deputy Prime Minister.
Oh dear, I can see the headlines already. That hadn't occurred to me. So confident am I,
absolutely,
of the retention of power that it didn't even occur to me. Right, let's move on swiftly then.
I think it was a subliminal message myself. But
no, it wasn't.
He should know. Right,
let's both read it, shall we?
Yes, that's my Christmas gift to myself.
Diane in Caterham. Hello, Diane.
Good morning, Nick.
Morning.
I just wanted to ask, I am aware that there's significant cultural and racial difference in England at the moment. Mm-hmm. And I just wondered if you feel that you are doing enough or have done enough to help society to become tolerant of and even embrace each other's cultures, particularly the way that Nelson Mandela did to his oppressors.
What do you have in mind, Diane? I mean, there are many things we can do to make sure that society is as open and integrated and tolerant as we all want it to be. Can I just ask? Because I suspect you probably have some views about what you think we're not doing enough of.
No, I just, you know, I'm still aware that there are cultural differences and there are prejudices, and you know, he sort of came out of prison and he was forgiving and very embracing, and
I tell you, I would draw a distinction, by the way, between, because you just put prejudices and cultural differences in the same kind of sentence. They're quite different. Of course, there are cultural differences. People come from different cultures, have different religious beliefs, you know, eat different foods, listen to different music. I mean, there are cultural differences. It's not the differences that are the issue. If anything, actually, I think the fact that there are so many differences in one society is a great thing. It makes society diverse and so on. It's the fact that we should always seek to show respect and tolerance towards each other, you know, across those differences, and that everybody should be united by certain basic kind of, you know, basic convictions about the rule of law, about equality before the law, about human rights, about the, you know, the dignity of all individuals, regardless of where they come from. So it's not about smoothing out differences. It's actually, if anything, about both celebrating and being tolerant and respectful towards those differences. That's without getting too kind of highfalutin about this. That's one of the messages I draw from Mandela. He wasn't saying there are no differences. He was saying you should treat those differences without any rancour, without any sense of vengeance, but with an open heart and a generous spirit.
Diane, it's Nick Ferrari here. What do you think Mr. Clegg and the British government should take from it then? Let's turn it back on you a little bit, if I may. What would you like to hear Mr. Cameron, Mr. Clegg suddenly come forth next year and announce?
Well, I just kind of think that there should be some sort of acknowledgement that more and more immigrants are coming into England. Well, obviously there is acknowledgement, but that there should be some kind of message conveyed that we need to embrace them and.
Okay. I think from where I'm sitting, I think the government go out of its way actually to ensure that we are, and they make quite right and certain that there are provisions for those people. Diane, thank you. We will perhaps return to Mandela. We'll move on just after a final question.
Yeah, sure.
Nick Clegg, what did you take from the memorial service? What did you take from the life of Nelson Mandela?
Well, I think, look, I'm 46, so for my generation there were two huge events which sort of defined the way that, you know, people of my generation looked at the world. One was the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the end of this sort of crippling division of the world between East and West, communism, capitalism, and so on. And the second was the release of Mandela and him reaching out, as we've just talked to Diane about, with not a shred of bitterness. Quite extraordinary after 26, 27 years in prison. And so both of those events, one was an event, the other one was a person, if you like, just kind of gave you an immense sense of hope that with will, with, you know, political and personal will, with a willingness to kind of think anew, to cross boundaries, people can elicit the most extraordinary change, positive change, and that's the I think that's the most enduring thing about Mandela, is that he not only had a message which kind of crossed boundaries and crossed communities, crossed continents, seems to have touched everybody. He also had a character which seemed to reach out to everybody. He had this lovely wit, he had this lovely sense of humour, he loved kids, he was free of any of the bitterness that I think most normal mortals would feel. So that ability to kind of raise your sights, look over the fence, so to speak, and bring people together. And by the way, he had the last laugh, because in the stadium on Tuesday, there was a gathering of world leaders, many of whom would normally never set foot in the same room together. So even, if you like, in death, he acted as a catalyst for people to overcome their differences, or at least share space together in a way that would be unimaginable at any other event.
Do you think he would have found the fake signer funny? You're aware of this?
I suspect he might. I know it's serious. Of course it's serious. There is a very serious side to it. But I mean, he did have a very mischievous wit, and I don't read sign language, and for those, of course, who relied on,
it's terrible.
Right, it's absolutely terrible. But I suspect he might have chuckled a bit.
We have other calls.
Joshua in Manor Park.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Nick, my question is on the back of Mr. Cameron's announcement yesterday regarding the government's change of view of the dementia.
Yeah.
I'm actually a primary carer for my mother at the moment, suffering from the disease. And obviously it's natural to focus on the sufferer, but I fear that there's not enough attention being paid for the carers and support for carers, which obviously impacts on delivering care for the sufferer. So I just really wanted to clarify what's the government understanding of the illness, and how is policy going to be formed to actually support not only the sufferer, but the families that have to deal with this horrendous disease.
Well, I mean, Joshua, first, did you say you are caring for someone with dementia?
Yes, my mother.
Yeah, and you have done for some time, or?
Yeah, in actual fact, Nick, I had to give up my job 2 years ago because I was trying to hold down a job as well as providing care, and it got to a stage where it was impossible because I couldn't rely on the social services to provide the level of care that she needed in terms of health visitors and so on. So I had to give up my job, and now I'm on this downhill slide to poverty, basically, because of the number one, the carer's allowance is insufficient, and the income support is insufficient, and obviously, you're looking after somebody, but there's two people involved in a disease at minimum.
Yeah. Well, Joshua, look, I think you speak for so many people in the country who are. It's perhaps an overused phrase, but I really do think it's applicable to you and so many other people like you. You really are the unsung heroes and heroines of the country, because you are, through the love and compassion you have for people close to you, you are doing a huge service to society as a whole. Because otherwise, the cost of looking after, in your case, your mother, would fall entirely on the shoulders of the state. So we all owe you, I think, a great debt of gratitude, and it's clearly you've made huge sacrifices for it. In broad terms, there is the issue about what kind of financial support you get, and you've already said that you feel that it is insufficient. There's also this issue, and I wanted to ask you about it. There's also this issue about what kind of respite breaks can be given to, what kind of respite can be given to you as a carer, because I certainly, those carers I speak to, not just those looking after loved ones with dementia, but other conditions, say that the thing they need most is just a week off from time to time, just a bit of time for themselves, and that, as you know, we've tried to improve those rights to that kind of respite. But is that something you would recognise as well, Joshua, or not?
Well, yeah, respite care would be useful, but to be honest with you, it's also support outside of the respite,
right.
Where, for example, if there was somebody that I could ring and just get some advice on dealing with a particular issue that's occurring at that point.
Right.
What
you mean, issues related specifically to dementia, or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when the illness visits a family, there is obviously one isn't trained in how to deal with it, and
it degenerates over time, of course. Yeah,
exactly, and so you're learning as you're going along, and obviously because you're dealing with somebody that you love and care for, you're constantly stressed that you're doing the right thing, or you may be. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, Joshua. I'll tell you what. I mean, I will. If I could take your details from Nick Ferrari's team, I will get back to you, because that strikes me as an extremely good idea, and not an unduly complicated one, to give people like you, carers who, out of the sort of love of your heart, are helping a loved one, but you're not an expert in the condition. Readily available advice about what you should do, and if I think that's an excellent idea. Let me look into that and get back to you.
Joshua, just before I hand you over to one of the team, just so that my listeners do you mind my asking just a couple of questions? You don't have to answer any of them. How long has Mum had the condition?
Well, she's 91 now, and she probably had it from early 60s, but it wasn't diagnosed until about 10 years ago.
And things like the local impact team and the NHS, how helpful are they being towards you?
Well, they're helpful to a point, Nick,
I know
but,
what you mean.
but the focus is all to do with the sufferer, and they don't seem to ask too many questions about the relationship.
How you're coping. No, I know.
Yeah, but not only that, but how to deliver the care that they're suggesting.
And just lastly, how much, when you put together your carer's allowance and whatever else, what sort of money, if you don't mind my asking, a week are you living off, Joshua?
My income support is £56 a week, and my carer's allowance is £71 a week.
Stay on the line. The Deputy Prime Minister or one of his team will be in touch. Thank you. Good luck and my best to your mum. Please convey my best.
Likewise, Joshua. Next caller, Tim. Tim in Bromley. Hello, Tim.
Yeah, hello, Nick.
Hello.
Mr. Clegg. I've got a phone call from LBC 97.3 on the back of my comments on Monday.
Oh, yes.
Now, I'll reiterate the comments in case
Right.
you never heard or you haven't been debriefed in any way.
I haven't.
The chap that made the comments on Monday saying that the MPs justified this pay increase,
Oh, yeah.
which will take them over £70,000, is beggars belief that they can give them 11% pay increase at a stroke of a pen on the say-so. They can apparently give their own increase to that amount of money, yet none of the MPs, pound for pound, would back up the Life Angels, the nurses, the fire brigade, other immediate services within the country that keep the backbone of this country going.
Yeah. And just to inform the Deputy Prime Minister, we had a phone-in on Monday, I think, when it was announced that the MPs might be in for this pay, or indeed the recommendation could be coming through. And we had a couple of people who actually contributors who said, yes, they deserve that money, if not more. Deputy Prime Minister.
No, Tim, look, as I hope you know, actually myself, David Cameron, Ed Miliband, we're all unusually in politics as one on this one, which is we think it is incomprehensible and wholly inappropriate for MPs, who are, at the end of the day, let's remember, public servants paid for by taxpayers, to be paid or to have an increase in their pay, which is completely out of line with the pay restraint that exists for millions of other people in the public sector. And not only do I firmly believe that, actually as a government we wrote to this body, IPSA, which is independent of politicians, and I'll come to that in a minute, some months ago, and said, look, public consent is perhaps more than almost any other vocational job I know. How MPs are remunerated really does need to go needs to go with the grain of public consent. We are public servants. We are there to represent the public. So more than almost any other job I can think of, it is essential that what is done in a way that the public can understand, accept, and support. And I think at a time, I mean, it may change as things get better in the future, but at a time when it is this government that is saying to millions of people in the public sector, look, you can't have a pay increase of more than 1%, I think it really would be very difficult to put it mildly, to explain why MPs should be treated so very differently. Now, as you know, the body that's put forward this suggestion is entirely independent of politicians, precisely because politicians, when they were deciding on their own pay and rations in the past, got into the total mess of the expenses scandal. Now, some people are suggesting, well, because this body's come up with this bad recommendation, we should somehow scrap it. I really would be very wary of turning the clock back and giving going back to the bad old days of MPs being judge and jury of their own pay and expenses all over again. And that's why, final point, Tim, it's worth remembering that this is at the moment, it's not cast in stone. As the head of IPSA, I think, is explaining today, this is something which will be reviewed after the next election. The decision would only be taken then in the view of the circumstances after 2015. So thankfully, there's still some way to go with this process. But look, I've made my views very clear. David Cameron's made his views very clear. Ed Miliband's made his views very clear.
Is there an announcement within the next half an hour or hour or so? Is there?
I think. I'm
10 o'clock. I'm told. Sorry. Do we know? You don't know what that is. What the it's going to be this.
I'm assuming it's going to. I'm assuming since the head of IPSA has written an article this morning. Basically, what he said, by the way, but he needs to speak for himself.
Yeah.
He said, look, because we're making MPs pay more for their pensions and we're cutting a whole bunch of expenses that MPs presently get, the overall cost of this won't cost the taxpayer an extra penny. So he, that's kind of the point he made. And look, I mean, not only do I firmly believe it would be inappropriate at this time for the reasons I just explained to Tim. When one of the first decisions David Cameron and I took when we went into government, I remember us sitting around the cabinet table, was to say to everybody around the cabinet table, you're going to take a 5% cut in your pay. We've kept ministerial pay frozen ever since.
I must just do a couple of email questions. Thanks for your call, Tim. Rachel in Barrow. The TV presenter Mary Berry has admitted she once smacked her children. Sorry, she regularly smacked her children across the legs with a wooden spoon. Do you or Miriam ever smack the boys?
No, like all parents, I sometimes have to restrain myself when if they don't go to bed on time or do their homework. But no, we do not.
You don't. They've never been smacked.
Not smacked. No.
Oh, what does that mean?
Well, no, what I mean is, no, I don't smack my
tapped.
No.
You? What about you as a child?
No, I don't ever remember my parents doing that. No, they were. My parents were quite strict, but their authority was such that they didn't need to
Right, so he could just do it with a glare, could he, your father? Or did he have
yeah. They you know, there's four of us, and we're all four. All my brothers and my sister and I were all fairly strong, boisterous characters, but they kept us in line.
And what about parents generally, providing it's within the law, should be allowed to?
Oh, look, I'm incredibly reluctant. I always think it.
When Mary Berry says it didn't do her son any help.
That's for Mary Berry to look. I just, you asked me a question. I'll tell you what I do with my children, what my parents did with me. All I'm saying is that I really don't think politicians should start sort of providing parenting lessons to the parents of this country. Parenting is an incredibly difficult thing to do. It can be very frustrating. Children can absolutely, you want to pull your hair out sometimes because they can be so difficult. But the way Miriam and I choose is not by.
But the occasional slap with a wooden spoon.
I do not use a wooden spoon.
No, but Mary Berry did.
Well, she's the mother of her children. I'm not, and I'm not going to start second guessing.
But it's all right for Mary Berry to have done that some years ago.
Well, I've no idea what a tap with a wooden spoon means.
Well, would you want me to show you?
No, but look, I'm really.
Why are you so reluctant to say yes or no?
Because I've no idea. Because I tell you why. I think parenting, and you know this as a parent, and I know this with three kids. It's really, really important that you don't start judging parents before you really know exactly what happened, why they did it. I have no idea whether tapping someone on the knee with a wooden spoon.
I think it's back of the leg, actually, not the knee.
Well, I've no idea whether it hurt. I literally have no idea. I wasn't there. I've never met Mary Berry. So all I'm saying is, you asked me how we treat our children, Miriam and I. We don't do that kind of thing. But I'm not going to start becoming terribly judgmental about what other parents have done with their children. Of course, you should not, in my view, inflict violence on children. No. You certainly shouldn't do anything which is against the law. Of course not.
But a gentle tap on the back of the leg with a wooden spoon.
Look, I have no idea whether that is appropriate or not. It's certainly not appropriate if you do something which inflicts pain.
You're walking
on a
around the supermarket this Saturday and you see a mum smacking a child. Would you intervene?
Look, have I pulled my child away from something that I want to do? Yes. So is the idea that you can be a parent and never ever physically move your child from one other thing? Or have I taken my child's hand and said, right, you're off that Nintendo now, you've got to do your... Of course you do that. It's absurd to suggest that parents don't have physical contact with their children. What you're asking me to adjudicate on, and I simply won't, is what exactly another parent has done to their child in circumstances which I'm not aware of. Assuming, by the way, they don't do anything which is cruel or gratuitous or violent or, still worse, illegal.
And just one other one before we go back to the calls. Graham in Bushy, in your Christmas card, you look as if you're either asleep or staring at your wife's chest. Can you confirm which one it is?
Who asked that?
This is Graham in Bushy, who's sending an email.
Graham, honestly, you are a cynic and a slightly untoward one at that. I'm just looking down, for heaven's sake. I mean...
Why is there in your card, and obviously you can speak for yourself, you can't speak for the Prime Minister, but there's no Christmas imagery at all.
There is in my card.
In your... But the background is, I would imagine, your sitting room. I have no idea.
But there's a whole lot of Christmas imagery.
I know, courtesy of your children. But the other one, it's as if each of you're all so big that we don't even need to refer to Robins or Christmas.
Give it to me.
Oh, well, there's no need to get angry about it.
No, I'm not. Honestly. So here you've got Happy Christmas.
I know.
Written in
But the original shot... Why can't we have you with a Christmas tree behind you?
But this is a Christmas tree.
I know, because your boys... Which boy has done all that, by the way?
Well, all three of them fiddle around. The oldest boy did most of it.
But, right. But thank goodness for the oldest, there are three. Oldest boy. Otherwise it would just be... Why can't we have a nice...
Honestly, I think many things. The idea that when you actually have a photograph with me with a beard imposed on my chin and a Santa hat...
But you know the
this
point
is not
I'm
Christmas.
driving at.
Look, I can't speak for Ed Miliband and David Cameron. The idea that this card doesn't have a very simple message, which is Happy Christmas, with lots of colourful Christmas doodles in it, I honestly...
I stand correct. I stand correct. Not for the first time. We pay tribute and credit to your sons.
As you know, we don't like to have photos of our kids, but we've always in the past... Our kids have always fiddle around with Christmas cards, and
but the other two do, and there's no Christmas there at all. There's no Christmas tree. There's no baubles. There's no sledge. There's nothing. They're just walking down the beach in one of them.
But ask them. I'm not the designer of Ed Miliband, David Cameron's Christmas card.
Let's go to other calls.
You are in a bit of a bolshy mood this morning. Well, Jamie in Upper Beckenham. Jamie.
Hello.
Hello.
I was just wondering, what's your opinion on Uruguay being the first country in the world to legalise marijuana, and where's your stance on this?
Well, my stance is quite simple, which is that do I think we're winning the war on drugs as a whole? Well, you just have to see the stuff that Norman Baker's quite rightly announced today about reviewing legal highs to see how difficult it is to keep up with a criminal industry, which is increasingly, which is incredibly creative, very ingenious at creating in the case of legal highs. I know you're not asking about that, but it's quite relevant.
No.
A concoction of chemicals where children at the moment can get hold of these legal highs, which have a stronger effect than ecstasy, and yet they're legal. So you need to constantly keep this under review, which is why I'm very supportive that.
I understand.
And you need to be led by the evidence. We talked about this before on the show, James. My view is that it really isn't actually as simple as should you legalise it or not. I think, for instance, one of the things I've always felt we could do more of, and the evidence around the world seems to suggest this is the case, is if you treat people with drug addictions as a health problem and not just a criminal justice problem, you bang them up in jail, do nothing, and they come out and they just carry on with their addictions on harder drugs. That's a really good example where actually I think you could do something to help the individual concerned, but also cut them off from the criminals who are peddling their drugs to them. So I do think we need to go with the evidence. It's why I've always believed we should try and be as kind of objective about this as possible. It's why I asked the Home Office to conduct this overall review about what other countries are doing, and Norman Baker's still completing that review. And it's why I don't think we should be closed. We shouldn't close our minds to what other countries are doing. Do I think legalisation is a sort of magic wand solution to the drugs problem? No, I don't. I never have done.
Let's fit in one last one if we can, Mr. Clegg.
Sure. Madupe in Finchley. Have I got your name right, Madupe?
No, you haven't.
Sorry.
Well, that's probably my fault.
My question to you is, what is your view on this surprise visit by Ofsted to schools where where children are badly behaved? Why are the schools responsible for badly behaved children? What about the parents?
Well, of course, parents play a huge role, and I'm sure.
This is a report earlier this week, I think, that talked about the high levels of 700,000 children in schools up and down the land apparently falling victim to badly behaved, other badly behaved.
Are you a teacher? Yourself?
No, I'm not a teacher. I'm actually a school governor, and I find it incredibly difficult that all the pressure is being piled on the schools and the head teachers and the teachers. It's. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and every day I spend 2 minutes with her saying, when you get to school, you need to be well behaved, you need to put your hands up, you need to say please, you need to say thank you. Why aren't parents doing this, and why isn't the focus on making sure that the children are well behaved at home before coming into school?
No, look, I think you speak for a lot of teachers who would say, look, of course, good teachers, and this, to be fair, is the point of Ofsted, is that you can't teach children in a classroom which is constantly disrupted by bad behaviour, people at the back of the class not following the rest. You do need. I have quite a sort of old-fashioned view that when you've got 30 kids in a class, you've got to be pretty strict with them to make sure that you get through that 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, and they come out of that class having learned something new. So you do need some discipline, but you're quite right, and that is, by the way, why I think the more that schools work with parents, and that parents are involved in their children's education, understand what the homework they've got to do, come to parents' evening, feel that they are as much co-authors, if you like, of their child's education as much as anything else, that has a dramatic effect on education. And certainly the best schools I visit, and I visit countless brilliant schools, do a lot, particularly, by the way, in the most difficult areas, sometimes to actually go out. I visited some schools in some very, very, very difficult, deprived areas in the country where the head teachers actually, in some cases, employed some people, and in some cases employed some people with the use of this money of the pupil premium, which is extra money that we provided to schools catering for children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, employ people to go out to families to make sure that where there's a problem in a child getting ready for school, being changed into uniform, arriving on time, that they sort it out with the family. And it has dramatic effects. So what I would say to schools is, don't imagine that you sort of reach out to the parents. And I guess my message to parents is, you cannot wash your hands of responsibility of your child the moment they walk through the school gates. It really is an act of partnership. And when parents and teachers work together, the effects are always beneficial to the child.
I'm off to design my own Christmas card. My thanks go to Nick Clegg, Deputy Prime Minister, who we see at the same place, same time next week. Mr. Clegg, thank you very much.
I'm looking forward to your festive Christmas card.
I'll do one. I'll get your lads to do it. It'll be far better. 9:34 on LBC 97.3, where news is next.
Nick Clegg says an 11% pay rise for MPs would be wholly inappropriate. The head of the watchdog responsible for setting MPs' pay says they deserve a one-off uplift, but the Deputy Prime Minister's disputed the suggestion.